want to share with you a project that I'm starting. When I was a painting student at the New York Academy of Art, we used to make master copies. This was a good practice to help inform students about the artist's process and technique, and offer some insight into how they worked. It's also a great way to learn how to paint more quickly. I want to take this same idea of learning from the masters, but this time I will be learning from a Japanese woodblock designer named Kawase Hasui. If you go to the Christensen collection at miniaturejapanesewoodblocks.net, I'll put the link below. Scroll down to the Hasui gallery, 3E. You will find an amazing collection of Hasui postcard designs. I find these miniature prints to be so delightful. I love how he uses color and how he composes the space. I look at these prints often for inspiration, and in this case, to learn how these prints were actually made. Now, I've made a few Hasui reproductions in the past, and I have learned a lot from this process. They have been mostly winter scenes, capturing snowflakes and dark, tranquil winter landscapes. This time, I'd like to look at a nocturne scene with the moon reflecting in the water, titled Moon at Matsushima. This design reminds me of Lake George in the Adirondacks, New York. I have been visiting the Adirondacks for many years, and by far one of the most beautiful locations in New York State. It's a large lake surrounded by tall mountains, and dotted with over 170 islands throughout the lake. The landscape and islands remind me a lot of this Matsushima print. I'm going to be breaking down this print into separate color layers in Photoshop. My plan is to make my own version of this design from my tracing, and I will be scaling it up from the original size. I'm not going to be printing in the traditional Japanese woodblock style called Mokuhanga, but I'll be getting more into that later in this video. So let's get started. First, I open the file in Photoshop and begin to survey the entire print. I start to take notes of all the individual colors that I can see, and I give them each a name. The best place I start was looking at the edges of the print. Here you can start to see the individual colors that are not quite lined up with each other. These postcard designs were carved and printed quickly. The object was to produce as many as possible in a shortest amount of time. To my understanding, this type of print was similar to how we use and treat postcards from a friend or a birthday card from a relative. You open it up, put it on your shelf for a few days, and eventually you just discard of it. These objects were not considered fine art, and making them fast was the publisher's goal. Another area that I looked for individual colors was around the moon. I can see 4 colors in this area alone: a light blue, a dark blue, gray, and black. The color of the moon is actually just the color of the blank sheet of paper. As I work my way around the print, I look for more evidence as to how these colors are overlaid. I also take notes of areas that I'm unsure how were printed, or areas that may be a mistake from the carver or printer. I notice some areas where there is pigment buildup, called tamari, or this area around the trees where the carver most likely didn't carve deep enough. Pigment builds up on these shallow carved areas and eventually starts to show up in the prints. This is considered a mistake of the printer. I will choose not to include these imperfections in my printed version. After I have compiled my color list and I have roughly figured out all of the overlays, I start the actual tracing of the shapes. I use a single pixel brush, and literally I trace around each and every shape throughout the whole design. After I close a color shape, I fill it in with the bucket tool to make sure I didn't leave any gaps. I slowly work my way around the design and label each separate color layer. This process can take a while, but I actually enjoy this kind of work. It is very relaxing, and it's something you can easily pick up and set down in between other projects. I'm going to jump ahead and show you what I have come up with so far. First, we have the border block. This is a blank block that will be used for 2 gradations that are not shown here. Next is the light blue. This is a background block that will be used to print a flat blue color. This block cuts out the shape of the moon and the reflections in the water. It will be used a second time in the sky to print a dark blue gradation, which is also not shown here. The black block is next, which will be printed last. I almost always print from light to dark for all of my woodblock prints and linocuts. Here is the first gray block that is printed underneath the black. The dark gray block brings out the details in the islands, the rocks, trees, and boat. And finally, the light gray block, which will be a very light transparent color that represents the rolling waves in the foreground and the shapes of the two distant islands. I always create a border around the whole printed area and a second border that represents the paper's edge. Here I titled it Kento block. It's important to keep this border remaining consistent and locked, as these are the guidelines I use when I cut the transfer sheets. These are also the lines that keep everything lined up or registered during the whole printing process. As I zoom in, you can see the actual border lines. I wanted to point out that there are two areas that I have changed slightly. I altered the shape of the island because I didn't like how it overlapped this lighter area in the water, so I trimmed it slightly to sit more flush with the light color underneath. I also trimmed this area of the boat because I thought it was too thick in proportion to the boat's scale and size. I just trimmed and matched the two gray areas to make this a little cleaner. I'm not sure if this is a paddle, a pole, or a fishing rod. Let me know in the comments below if you know what kind of boat this is. As I'm sitting here editing this video, I notice I missed an area. Here in the trees. This shape needs to be cut out to form a sky hole through the gray color. To fix this, I will grab my lasso tool and trace the area. And once I find the correct layer, I will delete that selection. Here is my finished color version in Photoshop. These color layers will each be printed out on separate transfer sheets and glued down. I'm not going to be gluing them down to a piece of wood though. I'm going to try and glue these down to a piece of linoleum. This will be my first attempt at trying this, and my goal is to use the linoleum and Western oil-based printing inks to replicate the look of a traditional woodblock print. Depending on the success of this technique, I will take what I've learned from this project and print a similar composition based on my own experience. I look forward to seeing how this hybrid style of printmaking turns out. So stay tuned for my next set of videos as we are continuing along on our printmaking journey. I want to ask you to please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and please leave comments below about how you found this video. You can also tell me more about your work and goals as a printmaker. And always, please feel free to ask any questions about my printmaking process. I hope you learned something from this video. Until next time, happy carving and happy printing.